Hello, and welcome to the second in the series of Somerford Associates podcasts. Delighted to say we're joined today by Shaun Cooney from Splunk. But before I hand over to Shaun and ask him to introduce himself, I'd like to sort of welcome back James Astley. James, what have you been up to since we last spoke?
No, it's been great. Just going through again, helping to get out and continue on from the executive forum that we discussed in the last episode. We've been having some fantastic collaboration with some of the organisations that we met on the day, and really just allowing Somerford as an organisation to start getting a bit more presence within the UA region that I think we touched on in the last episode. And for me, it's brilliant. You know, it's just at the moment, just talking to as many people as possible, really, and really starting to understand more about the region, what the opportunities and some of the incredible projects and programs of work. Certainly touching on the AI theme that was discussed very recently, but also what the challenges are and seeing where we could help. So it's been really good. Good to be back. Thank you.
Pleased to hear it. And Shaun Cooney. We're joined by Shaun Cooney. One of the sort of shining lights of Splunk, I think it's safe to say. Is that right?
That's a bold statement, John.
Bold statement.
I feel I need to say John D. It's great to be here. Thank you for the invite.
Not at all. Very pleased. So tell us about your role in Splunk then, and please.
Yeah, so I'm a field CTO covering Europe, Middle East and Africa at Splunk. It's an interesting role. It's a relatively new role, certainly in Splunk, but also kind of in the industry as well. My background is actually in the public sector in the UK, where I left as a kind of a senior leader in a technology organisation, trying to support the kind of the broader government organisation, wider government organisation. And that was great. I did that for almost 2 decades, long time. And then I decided that I wanted a bit of a change. So Splunk was the right place to go. This field CTO role is a real fantastic opportunity to help organizations, big and small. My job is really to help the most strategic of our customers across EMEA with their most difficult and challenging problems. And then problems, whilst they hopefully involve technology, hence why I work for Splunk, most of them problems aren't really about the technology. It's about solving business problems. And hopefully Splunk can play a part, small or large, in the solution to them problems.
Yeah, good. Well, we can come on to that. So you were over here supporting the executive forum that we ran, very successful executive forum. Thank you once again for your support. It's the first one of those you've done in this part of the world, if I'm not mistaken. What did you make of it in terms of the response, the level of engagement, the level of interaction, the questions, and the subject more broadly? What were your sort of key takeaways?
It's actually my first time in this part of the world altogether, not just for a forum like this. So thank you for the opportunity to come out here again. That forum in particular, I've done a number of them around the world, but that one in particular I found was really interesting because it brought a whole set of different perspectives together, I would say. And you know, the community out here is a broad set of cultures, people, a way of thinking from all over the world kind of brought together into this melting pot. So it means that when you talk about technology subjects like we were doing at the forum, you get very, very different views. I really liked it because it was so interactive. You know, you get some of these forums that I've been at and I've spoken at before where, you know, you sit there and you do your bit and then you maybe have some lunch, quiet conversation, and then you leave. But it really wasn't that, which was nice, actually. People were really engaging.
They're only there for the lunch. Is that what you're trying to say?
Maybe, yeah. I had to apologise to James because I spoke for a little bit too long.
It was well received. I mean, I think it was interesting at some point seeing some of the questions being fired at you. And the response, and we fired back at you. It was great. That's what you wanted.
I really enjoyed it.
You know, and so key takeaways. You know, I guess how would you say that some of the challenges that people are experiencing in this part of the world, how do they relate to other business challenges that you're speaking with business leaders across the rest of EMEA? I mean, how are they different, or are they just all the same?
The same but different.
The same but different. I thought you might say that.
Great statement, isn't it? Yeah.
In what respect? You're going to have to expand. Come on.
I will. So I think because of maybe legislation elsewhere in the world, I would say that things happen because organisations are often pushed to make changes. I think here, whilst the maturity may be slightly behind that of mainland Europe, it's just accelerating so much quicker than I've seen. The conversations that I've been having over the last few days, maybe they have been akin to the conversations I had a couple of years ago in Europe, but every time I have the next conversation with another customer in the space, they've moved so quickly and their way of thinking has accelerated so fast.
What is causing that, do you think? What are the drivers for that?
I think it's probably because of the customer experience, right? That's what this part of the world is really all about: improving that customer experience, making sure that the customers have the best experience in the world, right? I was saying earlier, I was doing some tourist stuff, right? And they were telling me, the tourist guide was telling me, this is the tallest building in the world. This is the building that has the most number of swimming pools in the world, right? Crazy stuff like that. So I think this part of the world just wants to be bigger and better. And the same thing, therefore, has to happen with customer experience.
I mean, we were talking about this last week, weren't we? When we were talking about that level, that innovation, entrepreneurial spirit, that sort of drive to, I mean, would that be, essentially there's real sort of synergy there, isn't there, between what we were talking about last week and what Shaun is saying?
I think so, yeah. And it'd be, again, she'll be interested to see, your experiences since being here. But I think since moving out into the region myself with my family, it was very clear how driven individuals are, and the entrepreneurial talent or way of thinking is very well cultured. And I think that then reflects into technology. And a way in which people are very happy to adopt technology to meet problems and actually kind of do it at speed, and then actually go, okay, well, maybe we need to tweak that or adjust it. And it'd be interesting to see your thoughts after speaking to quite a few people through the executive forum whilst you've been out here.
Couldn't agree more, right? Just technology seems to be baked into the culture and the way of life here. Something that you certainly don't see so much in the UK. It's just the other day when we were talking about identity.
Yes.
Right, and how the identity system works out here compared to in the UK is very, very different. But that can only work because of technology.
Yes.
Yeah, I think the innovation and the entrepreneurial spirit out here is a driver that I haven't seen in a long time.
You spoke very eloquently yesterday, and lots about operational resilience. Can we dig into that a little bit, please? What does that really mean for businesses?
Yeah, so maybe we'll just touch on resilience for a second, because just the word resilience on its own means a lot of things to a lot of people. And then you can kind of prepend that with operational, organisational, business, whatever you want to put before that. And they mean different things in different industries. That's part of the problem. But resilience overall means being able to, in my mind at least, being able to respond or predict when things are going to go wrong, whatever they may be, respond to them, and make sure that you have I guess an organisational response that isn't just the technology. Now, the most obvious example of that would be in cybersecurity. And I say it's obvious because that's honestly where the money's been for a long time, right? So that's why we have, CISOs now at board level, mostly reporting to the CEO, more than 50% now reporting to CEO. And so it's a board level conversation when it comes to cybersecurity. But cybersecurity, like I was saying just the other day, that encompasses confidentiality, integrity, and availability. If we now look at the world of IT operations, well, what do we care about there? Well, it's the same thing, just the other way around. Maybe focus on availability first, with a bit of performance maybe, and the customer experience all related in there too. So for me, it's about making sure that whatever happens in your organization, whether it be cybersecurity, IT operations, DevOps, or other things kind of within that technology remit, when anything goes wrong, it's how you can, well, first predict that it's going to go wrong and hopefully stop it, but inevitably something will go wrong. Putting enough things in place to make sure that you can very quickly respond to that.
Touching on something that came up during the executive forum that I thought was a really lovely analogy that Shaun walked us through, and I think resonated very well. It's the chef analogy. It'd be great if you maybe just go through that and just talk about it a little bit again, just for the listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. So imagine you are in a kitchen, you're a chef in a kitchen, and your responsibility is to make sure that your customers are happy, they're fed, they're provided the right quality food. That's what you'd expect, right? Maybe I can call this a McDonald's versus Michelin star parody. I don't know if I can say that, but I will. It's too late. So you're working in this kitchen, but I'm gonna place some constraints on you, and them constraints are that you only have access to see what the individual cooks in your kitchen are doing. You don't get to see the final product before it goes out to your customers, nor do you get feedback from your customers. You don't get to hear that. They may be speaking, but you don't get to hear it. Well, that's monitoring, right? You can set thresholds, you can measure the ingredients and make sure all of your chefs and cooks are doing the right thing. That's monitoring, and that's absolutely needed. You need that to make sure that you have a foundational level. But it's not enough, because your customers don't care whether that chef is being the most effective or efficient, as long as they get their dish in a reasonable period of time and it's of the right quality. And maybe you listen to their feedback as well, right? So if you have access, if you're now that head chef that's kind of in between all of your cooks and leaving the kitchen, then that's, in my mind, that's observability. You're listening to what the customers are saying, you're taking that feedback, improving your recipes, changing the ingredients, making sure the kitchen is working at its most optimal efficiency. That's observability. And you need both of them to make sure that you're an observable organization.
I think that point there, being an observable organization, you sort of raised that point yesterday. Again, we were sort of discussing this. It's a really interesting point. But observability, monitoring and evolution, it's not even that things haven't been available or haven't been around. But it'd be great maybe just to touch on that as well. Observability is lots of different things to different people, and there are certainly a lot of different vendors, ISVs, partners, SIs. We're all talking about observability, maybe in the same sorts of vein as AI.
Yep.
What's observability for you?
It's a great question, and I would probably say that a few years ago, the term observability was a buzzword for marketing purposes more than anything else. I no longer believe that's true. I now think vendors, including vendors like Splunk, have really changed the market. It's now no longer just tooling; it's an adjective to be observable. Right, to make sure your entire organization and the systems that support your organization and your business processes and your people are observable, so that you can predict these outages, problems before they happen. So I think the world has changed over the last few years in a positive way. That doesn't mean that you don't still need monitoring, right? That foundational level is still there. And really, in my mind, at least, you have monitoring, and then on top of that, you have observability, and on top of that, you have business agility. Right, different things, and again, these boundaries are massively blurred. But you can't be a super agile organization, a business, unless you have a level of foundational resilience underneath, and you get that from observability.
And that sort of level of resilience, though, brings with it, I guess, a few risks, does it? And how do you sort of how do you manage and assess those potential risks to operation to business resiliency?
We've been doing risk management in business for a long time, right? And it'll be remiss of me to say that this is any different. I honestly think it's the same thing. The problem is we're now talking a different language. We're now talking technology at board level. And them conversations, about ransomware or about customer experience in a language that makes sense to techies and engineers maybe doesn't resonate particularly well with the board level, and nor should it, right? So, a long time ago we said that we in technology and in IT need to be able to understand and help business leaders understand IT language. That was a mistake. It was a mistake. What we should be doing is teaching our technologists to be able to speak in the language of business, right? Yeah. And that's what we're now starting to see. That's why we have CISOs, and whilst the majority of them have a technical background, the most predominant skill that is required for a CISO these days is the ability to be able to have them conversations at board level about organizational risk. Do that translation.
You touched on language there. It's quite an interesting point, because language standards, frameworks are starting to shift quite dramatically in the use of technology now. And certainly, I think, touched a little bit on the last episode, I certainly 7-8 years ago would never have expected to see an enterprise software organization and open source technologies maybe playing together. But it'd be lovely, maybe a little bit product centric, but maybe just touch a little bit on observability and actually what the sort of language and protocols that observability is built on, and actually how that feeds back into maybe the wider strategy of someone like Splunk is starting to adopt. And that sort of maybe not realization, but that acknowledgement of, if we're going to get the right outcome for a customer, this is what we need to do. It'd be maybe great if you touch on that.
Yeah, sure. So maybe I'll touch on the last bit first and kind of work backwards there. So I think it's fair to say, and vendors have started to recognize this now, that no one vendor can solve cybersecurity. No one vendor can solve observability. So that means you have a number of choices how you can operate there, right? You can move entirely into the open source market, and some vendors have done that. You could remain proprietary and hope for the best, and maybe buy out other companies, buy up the market. That's an option as well, absolutely. And then the other option, the option that Splunk has chosen to go down, is to adhere to and lead in a whole bunch of open standards, recognizing that we are a proprietary vendor and will continue to be so, especially for the stuff that is our USP, at least. But because we have to work with other vendors and partners and competitors, the only way we believe that we can really do that is by pushing the open standards, so that we can easily integrate, and hopefully customers can pick and choose the components that work for them. And hopefully longer term, more and more of that becomes Splunk, right? That's the idea. And so that going back to your first part of that question, what kind of technologies are we investing in that space? Things like open telemetry, right? Splunk has been known for a long time with its universal forwarder to collect particular types of data, and that's great, or certain types of data. Yeah. But there's not just one type of data out there. There's lots of different types of data. So we should probably understand and respect them different types of data. Open telemetry is just a way of doing that. It's being led by a number of vendors. Splunk is one of them. And beyond Kubernetes, which is number one, it's the most contributed to library that's available, a project that's available right now. And probably later this year, or maybe early next year, if the trends continue, it's likely to be the most contributed project.
I think it's pretty awesome, actually. Looking back at the iterations, and actually, as I said, I personally worked for Splunk for a long time as technology and what some of them have done with the platform, and that definitely feels like a real shift. You can really feel that within not only Splunk but within the industry as well, and this sort of complete understanding and willingness to work with, as you said, partners but also competitors, in order to find that right solution. And reduce that continuous sort of infighting that perhaps has been there in the past. It's the slinging mud, and we can do this, or we can rip and replace, or tool consolidation. Yes, let's jump on that bandwagon, and let's try and be that person that rips out everything else because we can do the whole thing. Yeah. But actually, as you said, and it's your point around data, it's the right data. It's using the right standards.
The important bit is the right data, the right standards, and therefore using the right technology for the right thing. You just reminded me of when you said tool consolidation there, James. The problem with that approach means that if you choose the right technology for the right thing all of the time, it means that you will end up having a ridiculous amount of technology. And that brings on a different problem, right? Not just managing the contracts and the installation base and all of that good stuff, but the integration between them products and services. And more importantly, the effect that has on your users, the analysts and the engineers using them tools. You now have to train them and maintain that knowledge, which is really, really difficult to do. So that's why I think the integration becomes so important. So you should use the right technology for the right thing, but you shouldn't have to train all of your analysts to use the right technology for the right thing. They should be able to use a smaller number of products, and behind the scenes, let the technology and automation do the grunt work.
I'm going to ask a question now that it's probably going to be a little bit of the rolling of eyes, but you talk about automation. It leads on to the obvious thing that everyone's talking about at the moment: AI, ML, and you can sort of feel that sort of whenever you're talking about it now, where organisations and countries are trying to make the most of this opportunity. I think it's more to be said as opposed to something that's new.
Yep.
Your background is as a mathematician. I'd be really interested to know your view on what AI is, and actually how do you approach that? Not only as an organisation like Splunk, but your role as well as a field CTO, and you're having organisations who are probably coming to you and saying, "Look, hey Shaun, AI.
Yep.
What do we do?"
I was hoping to have a conversation today that didn't involve AI.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. Okay, so terminology is important, right? So AI that encompasses everything. Within that is machine learning. Machine learning has been around for a very long time. I think it's been in Splunk's capabilities for almost a decade now. Just like, and that's kind of like the predictive analytics, threshold management, all that kind of stuff. And within that, there's another type, category, I suppose, which is generative AI. And within that, there's large language models, and that's where we hear about ChatGPT and stuff like that. The kind of the buzz around AI at the moment is all around this generative AI stuff. And that's really, it's got a place, right? Absolutely, generative AI has a place. And we're already starting to see some quite significant changes in the industry. For example, in a few years' time, I'd be very surprised if most organizations didn't have an interactive chatbot using AI. It will be akin to not having a website. That's really going to be the shift that we're going to see in that space, I suspect. But generative AI is very good at domain-specific tasks, right? It's not very good at being hugely creative and trying to solve problems that humans are very good at. Yet. There will become a time, right? But yet, as it stands today. So often I get asked this question around cybersecurity or around observability. And I think in them spaces, it's a very niche area where you already understand a lot of the domain problem itself. So applying something like generative AI probably doesn't, it's not the silver bullet that maybe everybody is expecting. Now, don't get me wrong, you could still get benefits in that space by using generative AI, but I wouldn't jump on maybe the marketing bandwagon that we often see so much these days. I think where it will help is, like I was saying a second ago, actually, helping analysts and users better interact with the system. That's where we're really struggling at the moment, right, with the talent crisis. So if we can make it easier for analysts and users to be able to interact and get more value out of the data that's already in a system, then fantastic. And you can do that by natural language processing, which can be made better with LLMs.
So when organizations or CEOs are asking their CIOs or CISOs, or whatever, are we ready for AI? What does that mean?
Yeah, so Gartner did some research on this, and I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but it was a staggeringly high proportion of board members, CIOs in particular, saying that their boards don't understand the potential benefits, but also the risks. It's balanced. What it probably means is, I have a model that I like to use, right? So the model is defend, extend, upend. Right, I'll go through each of them briefly. So defend, first of all, what do we do in our business today? What business operations do we have? What processes do we have that we need to keep, but we could make more efficiencies by using AI? And a little effort is put into that space at the moment, but only a little. The next one is extend. What opportunities are there within our existing kind of scope in our organization to maybe move into a slightly different space, sell more, whatever it may be, right? So that's extend. What other opportunities are there? And then there's upend, and that's where most people think there's going to be more benefit. And that is, let's change our entire organization and focus on something very different using AI. And that's what you hear in the media, right? Yeah. That's where the hype is. But actually, if you flip that around and make the benefit of, or get the most out of AI today in at least category 1 and probably category 2, that's where you'll stand your ground and make most space.
Apologies, because it's a question that ultimately at the moment is so hot on everyone's agendas, and it's really interesting to hear it as someone obviously working within a technology that has that capability, has had machine learning statistics. Right, it's been around for a long, long time, and the generative piece. How do you understand it? How do businesses make use of it? It's a very interesting approach. Those 3 buckets and categories. The bit in terms of skill, and again, just very briefly on this sort of skills crisis or skills gap, and that's something that obviously as a reseller, that's very prominent in our world. That's where we often get bought in to augment capability, sometimes to be a standalone, sometimes to just be the implementation part. But really, it ultimately comes down to often the skills aren't there, and there is a huge shortage. We see it in the UK, we're seeing it obviously in the UAE. Really interested, and you've worked for different organisations and different people, but we've spoken before about you have quite a unique approach, and you had a unique approach at one of your organisations where you looked at how you hired. And I felt that was a really interesting approach that really focused in a slightly different model to get the best people in the organisation to help support you. Just, you wouldn't mind touching on that. I know it's a little bit outside of technology, but it's just, I think, a very, very poignant topic.
I'd be very happy to. It's one of my favourite things to talk about.
Cool.
So I guess the reason why this started is because of the talent crisis. Trying to get people is difficult, particularly in government where typically the salaries are lower. But more importantly, retaining them people is really hard. So you can put all the effort into keeping them, hiring them in the first place. But if they move on after a year, then it's a lot of wasted energy, right? And also, I guess the final point around that is technology moves so quickly. So there was an interesting stat that came out maybe a year or so ago, which is by the time you finish university, what you have learnt in the first year will probably be out of date when it comes to technology, right? So university can no longer, at least in technology, in the STEM world, can no longer be about teaching people things. It's got to be about teaching people how to learn things and how to be creative, right? It's a slightly different mindset. So in my old role, I was responsible for building up a team of several hundred people, and some of them had to come internal, right? So keep some of that organisational knowledge, but the majority of them we wanted to be new hires, external recruits. But we knew that there just wasn't enough people to hire into them roles as quickly as we wanted to go. So we changed the entire process, and actually we looked for 3 very important characteristics. We looked for curiosity, aptitude, and passion. If you could prove to me that you have them 3 things, then I'd hire you. Clearly, there's some HRE stuff around the side of that as well, just to make sure we're being fair and legal and compliant and all of that good stuff, and rightly so. But if you can prove that you got them 3 things, I'll hire you. Take a punt, right? And then I will throw money at the problem by making sure we can train people and give people projects and a safe place to fail. Right? And then after 6 months, if you can't prove that you have learned to fail, because inevitably that will happen in the future, right? So that was part of the test, as it were. So prove that you can fail in a safe way and then learn from that and then improve and then help other people do the same thing. And also pick up some technology skills as you're on your way as well, because it's a technology problem that we're trying to solve ultimately. If you can do all of them things, you can continue to work there. If not, then that's the end of your probation, and that's okay. And that was a major cultural shift in a government organisation.
Yeah, in a government organisation. Yeah. How was that received?
Very well. So there was the civil service study survey that happens every year, and we were a new division, I suppose, within that. And we, after the first year, were in the top 10 out of 10,000.
Wow,
something like that. So and the majority of them people still work there and still talk very fondly of it.
It's a really interesting approach, and obviously myself going through a process where often you're looking at hiring people and looking at what the right fit is, and as you said, what are those characteristics you're looking for within an organisation. What are you going to take from that experience, and if you could then refine it, and you talk about adding a layer on top, if your future roles and opportunities that may press you in the future.
Yeah.
How would you take that? What would be the next expansion to that? Do you think you'd add?
That's a great question. Probably for me. So I learned a lot in doing that, and I made many mistakes along with some of the successes that I've just mentioned. Probably, in fact, definitely more mistakes than successes. But like I say, that's how you learn, right? Probably the one that I would focus on improving in the future is that leadership layer that sits above. The majority of our recruitment was really around the entry to maybe 5-year experience, engineer, analyst, technologist in general. What I didn't say earlier is actually what we ended up is recruiting people that weren't non-technologists. The majority of them were creatives in some way. They were psychologists or musicians, and they were able to bring a different way of thinking to problems.
Fantastic.
Which is like a melting pot of so much fantastic knowledge just being shared in very different ways. But when I left the organisation, when I left that particular team, what we noticed is that a lot of it was driven by me and my personality. And that was fine when I was there. But what we needed to do is kind of bake that into the rest of the leadership team. So I'll probably do some type of exercise around in the future if I was to have the same opportunity again. I would reconsider how we build leadership teams and how we embed that same culture all the way up to the executive level.
Yes, great advice. Really interesting in terms of how you do that, but also the scalability, but legacy at some point in terms of making sure that when you're not there, I suppose that is the outcome you want to get to, that if you're not around, that framework and that way of thinking still carries on.
My philosophy has always been, if I do a good job, I'm not needed anymore.
Yeah.
Right? And always hire people that are smarter than you in some way. If you do them two things, then can't go wrong.
Surround yourself by people smarter than you.
Yeah.
Which I try to do on a frequent occasion. I mean, we have to have John sometimes. But,
Sometimes.
Yeah, just to bring you back down to earth.
To be fair though, John, I think it's an interesting point just to touch on in terms of leadership. And, obviously, again, yourself coming from a role within the public sector and your exposure to leadership and how you approach it, I think it'd be great maybe just as a touch on that as well.
I spent a long time in the army where I guess there was a certain style of leadership in certain situations, and certainly what I've seen on since in the 5 years since I retired, that you can't apply that same authoritative type of leadership, if you like, if there is a style of leadership like that, outside, because of course there are a number of different factors. I mean, you don't have other levers like you would do in the army, where you could sort of essentially impose, well, you have rank, for example, which brings with it a certain level of influence. I think the other factors outside of in the sort of private sector, if you like, those other factors are interesting, and I would always argue that what you've got to do is you can't, if you start to impose your position on people, then you've probably failed, actually, in so much as, I'm senior to you, you will do as you're told. I think you failed, because you've got to take everyone with you. There's an element of increased collaboration, looking at all those other sort of softer skills where you've got to listen to your team. I mean, we used to say, for example, you've got to, empathy is a key leadership skill. Understanding your team, understanding what makes them tick, and also giving them the responsibility, and to a degree the authority as well. So, and encouraging them to fail. And I think that is where it's only by failing that actually you become stronger as an organisation. I think the fear of failure stymies organisations, and I don't think that's a particularly positive thing at all. So, but of course, outside the drivers, I guess, or the organisational drivers are different to what they were in the army. I mean, for example, it's there's no costs involved in so much as you're not interested in driving profits or anything like that, and whereas the operational outputs, I guess, are completely different. So there are definitely similarities. I think it's just making sure that you are able to adjust your style accordingly in order to get the most from your team. That's what I would always argue. So, and delegation, as you know, James, delegation.
Different
leadership skills apply in different situations,
completely,
right? And
it's understanding that.
It would be crazy to apply maybe some of the more modern leadership styles that you see in businesses into the military, for example.
Completely,
and vice versa. It just wouldn't work. No. Have you heard of the Cynefin model?
No.
No, it's a Welsh word meaning habitat.
Habitat,
yeah. And I'm not even going to attempt to spell it. And it talks about 5 different leadership styles that you need for different situations. And I really like it because it makes sense when you talk about the military. So the first one is simple, and that's where you can have a playbook, right? If this thing happens, you do this. And you often see that in a lot of call centers, for example. Follow this pattern. The next one, and you don't need the same leadership style in each of these. That's kind of the idea. The next one is called complicated, and that's where most organizations think they are. That's what ITIL best fits, actually. And a lot of the project management best practices that you may see, right? And that's where you say, so I don't know, what would be a good example of that? A car, maybe, building a car or fixing a car. Overall, I probably couldn't fix a car, but I could probably narrow down the component in the car that has a problem. And then if I know enough about that individual component, I could probably fix that problem. Right, so you can take down a whole problem and break it into smaller chunks and then solve each of them individual chunks together, put them back together again, and you probably have a solution. That's sort of traditional project management fits. The next one is complex. And that is where most organizations are, right? And it's really, you can't use the same breaking it down and solving it in the same way. So you can't use the traditional project management stuff. It's really about breaking the problem down into smaller time slices. Maybe some of the agile stuff comes into play here, right? And then learning from it, probing, learning, and then readjusting very quickly, right? So that's when we start talking about the failing quickly. That's important.
Retrospectives, what you're going through and you're
Exactly.
learning.
Yeah, and some people are put off by the agile terminology, but most people understand the concept of learning from mistakes quickly. And then there is a final one, which is chaos, and that's really designed for situations like in the military, operational situations, for example, or when there's a fire. And actually, in that situation, leadership style of being told exactly what to do is the right thing. You have to know when to move between these different situations.
Course, yeah. And that's, for some people, it's a challenge, I think. It's interesting, we've sort of morphed into this conversation now. I thought yesterday, when one of the speakers was asked, and this company, big manufacturing company, was asked when they were going through that transformation program, what were their biggest challenges? And he offered it up to the team, and it was the human factors were the biggest challenges. Change, implementing a change process was the biggest challenge they had. Never mind everything else. You think of a company the size, 4,000 employees. You gave an interesting sort of way in which you approached it, and I wonder if you could share that.
So yeah, a lot of this is just psychology theory, right?
Absolutely,
there's nothing special about it.
But it is, isn't it? It's understanding people, understanding how they tick.
Exactly, and understanding what's in it for them, which is what I said yesterday, right? If you can understand what's in it for me as an individual to try and bring them along, adding that kind of empathy, learning what's important to them, then it's easier to convince them, but not always possible. So sometimes you need to think bigger, and you need to help the individual to think bigger, because maybe doing something that is a bit more harder work for them. That, you know, people are inherently lazy. I think just people are inherently lazy. So people will always try and do the easiest thing in their job to get the job done the majority of the time. So if you can convince people, actually, no, if you do this thing that's going to take you a little bit longer, or it's going to be a little harder, whatever it may be, and a way of doing that is by enabling them to think bigger. So trying to share the overall problem with them and get them to hopefully come up with the same solution as you together, and getting them to understand why we're heading there in that direction together. And if you can do that, give them that kind of authority or autonomy to solve problems themselves, they will probably buy into that and solve that problem. And they may not solve it in the way that you expected them to, but it shouldn't matter as long as the problem has been solved.
I was going to say, you're going back to the army analogy. You would say it's mission command.
Exactly that.
This is what I want you to achieve. These are your parameters. I don't really care how you get there. I'm giving you the authority to get there. Yeah. Crack on and do it.
Related
and people grow. I think they blossom as a consequence.
You have to have guardrails and all of that, of that good stuff, right? It's not just as easy as pointing people and see what happens. It's system thinking is where this all comes from, I suppose. And the idea being in system thinking that you have local problems and global problems, and most people focus on their little local problem. But if everyone improves their little local part of the process individually, then that's great. But overall, the process is probably still not massively efficient. If you take a step back and everybody together look at the overall process, the global problem, then you can probably make more efficiencies across the organization.
We started a conversation today about operational resilience.
We did.
It's it's been really interesting going sort of different areas. But actually, I think we talk about resilience, I think leadership styles and psychology, and actually we're talking about really emotional intelligence. It's becoming more and more important as a key driver into what people are looking for within an organization, but also how to run a service, how to be a leader. But John, again, just touch one more point on yourself, and that's given your background as well. It'd be interesting, maybe open it up as well to Shaun. Resilience, resilience for you within the workplace, within an organization. We talk about operational being technology, but what are your views on resilience and the importance of it, perhaps in the modern workforce?
Workforce.
Yeah,
I mean, personal resilience. It takes on many forms. I think what we're all shaped differently. We're all shaped by what's gone on in our past, by a variety of external factors. They make you the individual that you are, and of course, I guess they therefore build your own internal resilience levels. And for some people have a particularly high threshold or have triggers which initiate certain behaviours and really deal with them in their own way. And I guess the challenge, I mean, so often the challenge is that in certain sectors, I guess, I mean, say, in the environment that I came from, certainly we're expected to have higher levels of resilience, personal resilience. I think a traditional male-dominated environment as well, that builds in an extra factor. And if I'm honest, I think we as a society, certainly in the UK now, are seeing more of that unfolding, where perhaps we haven't given it the necessary levels of attention that we should have done. And more males particularly are having to sort of deal with this in their own ways. And I think it's nice to see, quite frankly, that more of society, more males in society are able to talk about it, because I think that's a really positive thing. Personal resilience for me personally is, how do I deal with that? I deal with that in sort of focusing on other areas, perhaps outside of work, which are important to me. So physical fitness for me is really, really important. And actually, I think, it sort of means different things to different people, really. I know we would all look at some people, or have looked at people in the past and thought, how on earth are they responding like that to that particular event or that particular situation? But that also essentially is all about emotional intelligence as well, because you've got to understand the way people are, as leaders as well. You've got to understand your people, understanding those factors that essentially either impact on their own resilience, what is happening to them and why that's happening, and how can you as a leader perhaps help, support, and I'm not going to say protect, but actually help and give them the level of support and reassurance that they need. And I think as well as out externally, you have peers as well that are there to help and and confide as well. I mean, that's always quite a, as well as I think as well, businesses are becoming increasingly aware that if you have low levels of individual resilience, I guess they need to put in place certain things that can help build that, because otherwise have that sort of negative effect. I don't know. What do you think about that? Does that all make sense?
No, it does. And the reason I asked the question is we talk about operational resilience and technology, but actually technology and people, cliche a little bit, but we say it all the time, it's completely intertwined.
Yeah.
He talks a little bit about thresholds and markers and checkpoints and learning. What we're doing in technology, we're doing checkpoints, triggers and alerts, and we're thresholding and we're baselining and we're learning about what is resilience and operational resilience for that business. So actually the human factor is completely intertwined. So as we develop as a modern business or changing to the next iteration, it's just interesting to know what resilience means for someone like yourself, John, coming from your background. And perhaps, John, do you want to
Yeah.
Maybe elaborate on that slightly.
I was thinking when John was speaking a second ago, it reminded me of, this is going to sound like I'm going off topic, but I'll bring it back. I gave a keynote in Brussels last year for a military organisation. And it was all about personal resilience, but tying it back to operational resilience. So I'll share kind of the highlights of that, which was when I flew over to the US just after COVID, they lost my luggage. May have mentioned some of the story to you the other day, right? They lost my luggage, and that meant that I had to travel across the US for 3 weeks, going from 0 degrees Celsius to 50 degrees Celsius and everything in between, doing a whole bunch of business meetings with government officials through to small startups, wearing just what I had on the aeroplane, right? It was, so for me, my personal resilience there was really tested. Kind of the buffer that I had, I often call this like a sponge. How much change can you absorb? How much can you tolerate before it breaks? Now, I could make light of that to the people I was having meetings with, and that kind of got me through it. Everybody had a little joke at the start, it lightened the mood, and we can continue. But some people wouldn't be able to do that, and that's okay. So the buffer for me was knowing that I could do that, but also that the shops were going to be open the following day, and I could go and buy some stuff.
You had continuity plan or resilience plans in place.
Exactly, and maybe Splunk provided some additional organisational resilience as well, because they had a travel and expense policy that enabled me to kind of support myself whilst I was out there. But every individual has to have their own kind of resilience management as well as the organisation. So Splunk and any other company can provide some level of that. But what the viewers here can't see and listeners can't see is that I'm 6'8" tall, right? So no matter how resilient I think I am, he's really not. So no matter how resilient I think I am by the local shops being and Macy's being open in the US, for example, then that's great. But unless I can buy clothes that fit me rather than really short shorts for meetings, it's going to provide a different level of resilience for different people. So I think maybe as a leader, bring it back to that for a second, kind of recognizing that you as an organization needs to support your people to make them resilient, which ultimately makes you as a company resilient, but recognizing that that level of resilience is going to be different for different people, and you may need to put in different support mechanisms for your people. And that will vary culturally as well.
Very good point. I think we probably run out of time now. Or have we? I mean, we could continue this if we wanted to.
Yeah, I think we're almost at a wrap.
But thanks once again, Shaun. Thanks for joining us over here, and your contribution as ever was stellar.
Thank you for the invite.
No, not at all.
Enjoyed it a lot.
And thanks for taking part in this in the podcast.
No problem.
That's a wrap.